I did a little oops there. Left you guys for a minute.
Thanks everybody for coming tonight. We're just going to spend another minute or two waiting for some of our RSVP folks, and then we'll get started. Thanks for coming. Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. So first, I just want to say good evening to everybody and thank you for joining us for this town hall on CI-126 and CI-127 tonight. Just a reminder that there's only 48 days until Election Day, and mail ballots will be out in just a couple of weeks. And so that's why we wanted to take some time this evening to share what CI-126 and 127 do and why we think they're absolutely critical for the state of Montana. We're also excited tonight to introduce three great organizations that serve over 100,000 Montanans that have decided to endorse both CI 126 and 127. Those organizations are Veterans for Montana Voters, the Billings Chamber of Commerce, the Montana Alliance for Retired Americans. We've got representatives from all three groups with us tonight, and I'll let them share directly with you why they are supporting these initiatives in just a minute. But first, I want to set a few ground rules for our time together. First, we'll hold a question and answer session following a brief presentation on the initiatives. So please use that Q&A app at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your questions. Our team will be monitoring the question box and compiling the questions to ask of myself and our colleagues, Kendra Miller, at the end of our time together. So please feel free to ask questions of our endorsing organizations representatives as well. Please remember to be respectful of others this evening. We've turned off the comment section, but you can send a note to our team directly with the Q&A box if you've got a question or concern. And we've got, I think, nearly 70 Montanans here tonight, and we're looking forward to a great conversation. We want to get through as many questions as is absolutely possible, and we'll, after we give you some information on the initiatives, we'll get to those. And finally, just as a reminder, you can find more information about these initiatives at our website, or send us an email to ask questions that we may not get to this evening. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce leaders from our three endorsing partners. We have David Oaklander and Scott Walgren, two veterans representing Veterans for Montana Voters. Al Ekblad from the Montana Alliance of Retired Americans, and Dan Brooks, Advocacy Manager for the Billings Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to let each of them take 2 or 3 minutes to share why their organizations believe the initiatives are critical to put power back in the hands of Montana voters. Dave and Scott, why don't you start us off?
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Good evening. My name is Scott Walgren. As Frank mentioned, I'm here on behalf of Veterans for Montana Voters. I spent 20 years of my life serving in the United States Navy. I come from a long line of family deeply rooted in service. My dad is retired Navy. My father-in-law, uncles, grandfathers, great-grandfathers have all served in the military. Generations of my family have defended the values that Montanans hold dear and that our nation was founded upon. But the division that I see in our political system today has no resemblance to those values that we fought for. Division, dysfunction, and an unwillingness to solve problems that really matter. It's not what we fought for. That's why I'm standing here today in support of CI-126 and 127. These initiatives represent a chance to reclaim our democracy and restore a government that is responsible to all citizens, not just the powerful. I'm also here for my Naval Academy roommates, Tim and Seth. Tim was a naval officer. Seth was a Marine Corps officer. Neither of them are here today. So I speak on behalf of Tim and Seth, keeping in mind their kids, my kids, and your kids, to be honest, about what kind of country I want to leave behind for them. Tim and Seth would have this same conversation if they were here to do so, and I will have it in their stead. The system we have now will not fix itself. It's going to take all of us from a citizen and voter level to demand something better. So these reforms are a step in the right direction, and I'm excited to be a part of the conversation this evening.
Hey everyone, my name is David Oaklander. I served 23 years on active duty. Most of my time was out of Fort Bragg in North Carolina with the 82nd Airborne Division. While I was there, I led a brigade into Baghdad as the first of the surge brigades back in 2006, and then I commanded a battalion leading the first battalions into southern Afghanistan during that surge. While I was in Afghanistan, of the 1,200 men and women that I led, I wasn't able to bring home 9 of my paratroopers. And that haunts me to this day. That said, we all served and some sacrificed for really 2 things I believe in. Number 1 was our American ideals, and number 2 was our brotherhood and our sisterhood. And I believe that special interests and party bosses, they are corrupting our American ideals and our connections to each other. We are so divided today that we are not able to solve issues that our nation should be leading the globe in, like education, healthcare, quality of life, etc. And instead, our nation right now sits 33rd globally in access to quality education, 33rd in terms of child mortality, and 31st in access to clean water. That affects every Montanan, every rancher, every farmer, every veteran, everyone in Montana. And I truly believe that these initiatives are going to put the power to solve these problems and demand solutions back into the hands of the voters like me, and not in the hands of special interests, folks with a lot of money, and party bosses. Finally, like Scott, I'm a dad. I have 3 boys, and I was always raised to believe that I'm supposed to leave my community and my nation better than the way I found it. That's why I served for 23 years. And I am absolutely confident that these initiatives are going to start moving us in that direction so that I can leave this place better for my boys.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Brooks with the Billings Chamber of Commerce. I do our business advocacy and lobbying at the local, state, and federal level. Apologies for the voice tonight. I lost my voice over the weekend at a sports weekend in Denver. But anyway, back in 2017, we had launched our Elections Matter initiative, really working to get our membership more engaged in local government and local legislative races. We had hoped to do a couple of things. First, to help more business-friendly candidates get elected, and 2, inform our membership about who's running and what the candidates stand for beyond simply their identification with one party or the other. What we had found is that our businesses are very interested in reading candidate questionnaires, attending forum events, and evaluating candidates beyond just their party label. We also started asking our business membership how they identify politically. And frankly, it was no surprise, very similar to nationwide polling, that for us, about 1/3 of our members identify as political independent. So when we talk about like this initiative and the top 4 primary system, this is going to be a big benefit for those of our members who say, hey, I need more information on the merits of these candidates and the policies they support, not just a party identification. Just today, we were talking to a weekly gathering of our small businesses, and I had brought up this initiative and talked to them about it. And 8 out of 9 of our small businesses here, kind of a weekly focus group that we host, don't want to be constrained by the current system that only restricts you to 1 ballot in the primary system. So they are looking for more choice within their voting system. Ultimately, we believe that having more freedom of choice in elections runs parallel to our support of free markets and against unneeded restrictions. And that's why our board has endorsed this effort. So thank you for attending tonight.
Good evening. I'm Al Eckblad. I'm the treasurer for the Montana Alliance for Retired Americans. We're a grassroots organization that's made up of retired miners, firefighters, educators, some auto workers, state and federal employees, construction workers, and some community leaders. Our goal is to educate and inform retired workers and political leaders on the issues that affect older Americans and working families. We fight for better living conditions and more secure retirement for Montanans. It's for this reason that the Alliance decided to urge its members and all Montanans to vote for CI-126 and CI-127 in an effort to create open primaries going forward after November. It's no secret our political system is broken. The leaders that are being elected under the current system seem to be more interested in scoring easy political points or dividing us and our communities rather than rolling up their sleeves and solving the problems that workers and Montanans are facing. Or they seem to focus on specific issues, maybe one or two that cater to a small group of voters that supported them in the primary. That's why the Alliance supports moving our state to an open primary system. Open primaries give Montanans more choices and the freedom to elect leaders who will focus on solving problems like lowering the cost of living, addressing the cost of prescription drugs, protecting our Social Security and our retirement benefits. In an era of extremism, we need to get our politics back to a level of normalcy and vote for the person, not for a party, not on one issue. We need to look for people who want to govern, not destroy our political system. The way things are going right now, that just doesn't seem likely unless we stand up and do something about it. Hopefully, open primaries will empower Montana voters to hold our leaders more accountable, which will lead to better outcomes for our families, our communities, and our country. Thank you.
Really want to say a big thank you again to David, Scott, Al, and Dan for sharing what your organizations or why they support these initiatives. And now we're going to turn to a presentation on the initiatives themselves and how they work. And as a reminder, you can put those questions, I see we have some already, in that Q&A box, and feel free to ask them of us or our endorsing partners. And now Kendra Miller, my colleague, and I are going to take about 15 or 20 minutes to try to go through a little bit about what the initiatives are about, and then we'll get to that question and answer session.
Great. All right, I will let you kick it off, Frank. We're going to talk through some of the problems we're looking to solve, the goals of these initiatives, and then just functionally how they work, and then give an opportunity for folks to ask questions.
Well, as you can see, just a quick message about really who we are. We're a statewide coalition of Republican, Democrats, third-party advocates who believe that it's time to put voters first. We think it's time to put Montanans back in charge of their election system, and we'll talk more about why, if you didn't know it, you're not, here in just a minute. But you can see from the people that are involved in our board of directors, we're all Montanans. You know, this coalition, the ideas of the decision about what happens as we go forward comes from this coalition and groups of Montanans and people that I'm sure these are some names that many of you know who have served our state and been around for a long time. So want to start by making sure you know who we are. So some of our goals are protect our freedom to choose and who we vote for in every election, not just the primary election, but particularly the primary election. Some of you have heard me talk before. No, I talk about the 4 ballots I got in this primary election, right? 4 of them. I had to pick one to vote on. And when I did that, I was excluded from voting on any of the others, considering any of those other candidates, because I decided to choose that one ballot. We want to put voters first. It's time that the people that represent us had to worry more about the voters than they do special interests or party bosses, and it's time for them for our elected representatives to spend more time talking to us, building coalitions, and really being more concerned about the outcomes for our state. It's the best way to hold people accountable. And we'll, as we go through this, explain that a little more in the initiatives. but we are confident that these align with Montana's values much more. One, it puts voters in charge of their own election system. Second, it helps us provide more accountability for our representatives, provides us the freedom to choose who we want, and it gives us that competition that we'll see through these initiatives, gives us better outcomes. Next.
So next, we're going to talk a little bit about the problems with our current system. What are we trying to fix? We have some serious problems, and I think as we've been out talking to voters about these initiatives, that seems pretty obvious to folks that the system's broken and it's not working well. It might not be obvious to folks what we can do to fix it, and that's why we want to talk about these specific initiatives and what they can do. You know, right now, the way our current electoral system is set up, your choices are limited in primary elections. Like Frank said, we got 4 ballots. If you lived in Montana Congressional District 1, you got 4 ballots in the primary. You had to choose one and only one, and you're not able to vote for anyone else on the other ballots. So your choices are limited. In the primary election in Montana, only about 40% of people, roughly 40% of Montanans don't identify with a party. So this is a number that's similar both in Montana and across the nation. Even if folks are more likely to vote for one party or the other when they vote, when you ask them how they identify, the largest block of voters in Montana actually identify as independents. And they're being limited right now in primary elections to have to choose a ballot. Our current system limits competition and participation. Only 41% of Montanans participated in the 2024 primary election. And the primary election before that, it was under 40%. And that's less than half of what we see in November general election. So it's just a much smaller subset of people making these really important decisions right now, when the primary election is so consequential in so many races. And we see a huge lack of competition in general elections because of this system. So in 2022, 36 candidates across the state, that's over a quarter of all of our legislative races, didn't have any general election opponent. So no competition at all in the general election. And we think that's a problem, no matter what, even when, it's a good person who stepped up and ran, maybe I even like that representative. It's just not a good system if there's no competition whatsoever. And we should assume that there's going to be problems with responsiveness when we have a system like that. It makes elected officials more vulnerable to special interests and big money. A choke point that Frank often references, the primary system is acting as this choke point, and it's much easier to make it that way when so few people are voting, and when on top of the smaller electorate, we're limiting people's choices. So even fewer people are choosing the ballot that ultimately chooses the person who heads to office to represent us. And the way this system is set up incentivizes extreme policy positions and candidates. So even when elected officials maybe don't even think that the way they're behaving is in line with most of their constituents' opinions and what is best for them, this system that we have is incentivizing them to act more extreme, and we think that's a bad system. It results in division and gridlock. So this graphic on the right says in 2022, only 8% of US voters effectively elected 83% of Congress. That's a shocking number. That is, due to a few different things. It's due to the fact that fewer people turn out in primary elections. It's due to the fact that we have a shrinking number of districts and races, both in Montana and across the country, that are truly competitive in the general election. That makes that primary election the consequential one where people are effectively elected. And so we're just seeing a shrinking number of those of races be competitive in the general election. And then on top of that, people are forced to choose one ballot or the other if they don't get to choose from all the candidates. And so you just have this really small number of people choosing most of our elected officials. That's a shocking number nationally. The number in Montana is actually worse. So down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that in 2022, only 6% of Montana voters effectively elected 88% of the Montana House. So those are some pretty big problems. We don't pretend that CI-126 and 127 are a magic wand that solve everything that's wrong with politics. You know, there are other issues that come up a lot when we're out talking to people about these reforms. People are concerned about the amount of money in politics. They're concerned about misinformation and how people are able to get, you know, accurate news and things like that. There's other problems going on, and we can't fix all of them, but we can begin to fix some of the problems I was talking about on the last slide. And if we have that ability and Montanans come together, we can make a huge step in the right direction and solve some of these problems with a lack of competition, a lack of voter choice on who they vote for, and then just accountability with our elected officials. CI-126 is the top 4 open primary initiative. It opens Montana's primary election to give voters the freedom to choose from all qualified candidates in the primary, regardless of party affiliation. So everyone on the same ballot, you as a voter choose in every single race. Up to 4 candidates who receive the most votes in the primary will then appear on the general election ballot in November. CI-127 is a separate initiative. People say, why are there 2? It's because one impacts the primary election, CI-126, and one impacts the general election. CI-127 is the majority winner initiative. It requires that candidates receive at least 50% of the vote plus 1, so an actual outright majority. Most of their voters have to vote for them. That ensures that candidates have to work to gain the support of more of their constituents, and they really have to compete to win. The legislature will be required to implement these reforms next session in accordance with the Montana Constitution. So within the confines of this initiative, they would implement the system. But we think CI-127 is really important to put to voters so that voters get to decide whether or not they want to enshrine this principle, the principle of majority winner, into the Montana Constitution.
And so just to talk about the nuts and bolts of CI-126 a little bit, instead of those 4 ballots that I mentioned earlier, right, you'll have everybody who's qualified to be on the ballot be on one ballot. And you get to choose from those people who were eligible to be on the ballot, the one individual in each of those races that you think best is best qualified and best represents you. But now you get to consider all of them and not just part of it. Also gives you the freedom to vote for any candidate. And we've, you know, talked about this before, and it isn't just about the independents. But when I talk to independents or people, you know, young people who are getting ready to vote, and we tell them that, you know, the vast majority of people who are qualified to be on the ballot in the primary, where we really pick people, you're not going to be able to consider them. They just look at you like you're crazy, right? We have a system that doesn't give us the freedom to choose who we want to represent us. It provides more competition and choices to the voter, and we say that's good, that competition is good in everything we do, except when it comes to politics, right? And then we'd like less, thank you very much. And so this helps solve that problem, provides more competition. And while it's come to our attention that some people in power don't want to see more competition, we know it provides better outcomes for voters, and it puts voters back at the top of the food chain when we're considering what our decision-making process is going to be. That means more responsive government. And 127, very simply, just says you have to have the winner has to enjoy the support of the majority of people they represent, right? Have to build coalitions, govern more broadly, have to talk to their constituents, right? You know, when you look at those numbers that Kendra shared with you earlier, Special interests love it when they see there's only 6 or 8% of the people they're going to have to talk to, right? Because they're going to be the ones who functionally are going to vote for this person that is either, that is practically going to be in an uncontested race and moving on to the House of Representatives or Congress or whatever the office is. And when you have a majority winner, it limits the games that can be played. I saw one of the questions was, what about people being able to vote for the weakest candidate of the other party? Both the top 4 initiative in the primary, having that greater competition, and having this majority winner with CI-127 make that pretty difficult to do. And that's why you see better outcomes in those kind of places that use these kind of systems, and less division. And these folks are far more likely to represent the greater portion of people that they represent. And special interest hate it, right? And it's not hard to see when you see some of the folks who oppose these kind of initiatives, why they do, because they'd much rather talk to 8% of the population and spend their money on that, knowing Montana's a cheap date, than they would having to speak to 51% of you. And it's about time we made their work a lot harder. It's about making sure our representatives are more responsive to voters. Next.
So what are the main effects of these initiatives if put into place? I think it's really important. You saw on the first screen, and we talk a lot that we're a bipartisan coalition, from board to staff to our volunteers. We really do span the political spectrum, and that's because these initiatives don't benefit either party. That's not at all what they do. They increase competition by allowing more candidates, regardless of party, to advance to the general election, and then it's voters who decide, and that's how it should be. They undercut extremism and polarization by requiring all candidates to build broad coalitions across the entire electorate. No longer is a candidate incentivized to just go find the loudest, most sort of strongest activist group of people to vote them in a primary. They really do need to speak to a majority of their constituents and speak for what matters to a majority of their district if they want to get elected and reelected. The initiatives change the incentives for elected officials by shifting the power from the low turnout June primary electorate to the much higher, more diverse November electorate, where it really looks more like Montana. And from Sydney to Glendive to Missoula and the Flathead, that looks different everywhere. But we think that elected officials should have to be responsive to their district and to most people within their district. So in other words, when we say this changes the incentive structure for elected officials, the initiatives don't really change which party gets elected, and they might not even change who gets elected in a lot of these situations. As long as elected officials are doing a good job, they should get reelected. But it changes how the elected officials behave when they know they need to be responsive to a majority, most of their constituents. And then lastly, we hope that better candidates will choose to run in a better system when we're dealing with some of these problems of a lack of competition, with sort of incentive structures that push people towards extremism. Unfortunately, too many good people don't want to run right now. And we think a better system allows for better people to run, and they should want to be a part of a functioning government that doesn't have all these problems of division and gridlock. We know this works because we aren't the first state to try it. Alaska passed a top 4 open primary system on the ballot in 2020. And in the very first election cycle in 2022, a majority, over 50%, voted across party lines in their primary election. So what we know that means is that when people were given that opportunity, they took it. Not everyone did, and under our system, voters will get to all decide for themselves. But at least they have that option and that opportunity. And we can see from the data in Alaska that that's exactly what voters wanted to do when they were given the choice. We don't have that choice in Montana. We also saw, just immediate changes to the legislature. The overall makeup, the partisan makeup of the legislature didn't change, but the way they functioned and worked with each other did. They formed a bipartisan majority in the state Senate and immediately went to work on the three issues that were impacting most Alaskans in the biggest way. It was energy costs, education, and the economy. And they really put those issues first and sort of said, we're not going to deal with things that are coming to the table just to cause division, just to cause problems. We're going to deal with the issues that impact, most Alaskans. And I think, myself and all of the members of our coalitions want to see that for Montana. We want to see elected officials incentivized in Montana to work on those kitchen table issues that are impacting most Montanans on a day-to-day basis. Kick it back to you, Frank.
Well, to wrap it up, we want to talk about how these really are simple and yet profound common sense reforms that give you the freedom finally to vote for who you want to, better choice and more competition with all the benefits that come from that, and more accountability for our leadership. Now, I could throw up a survey, right, to tell you what people think of the direction of our state, of our country, of our politics, but I don't think I have to. I think most people know that I talk to and that our coalition talks to that we have to do better. And it's been broke for a while, right? And it is time for us to fundamentally change the system we use to hire people for the important job of governing. And it's time to put the people back in charge and to give them the ability to not just select those people they think will best serve them, but to hold them accountable for the decisions and the values that they think are important, right? So it's about better choices, the freedom to vote for the person you want, not just the party, and as important as anything else, to hold folks accountable. That's what these systems do. And we'll talk about it as we go through the questions, right? It's not a theory anymore. We have a number of other states out there that are trying these reforms or use them on, local government or for state elections. This is a, Montana-led solution, and it's uniquely Montana in some regards, but it uses some of those same principles. And we've come to recognize that the only way to change it is to put it in front of the people of Montana. And I have absolute confidence that the people in Montana see the need for change and recognize that we have to fundamentally improve the incentives as Kendra talked about in our system. So with that, and I think we came pretty close to 20 minutes, which is pretty good for me. And now I want to make sure we get a chance to start working into some of the questions. And Katie, is that something you can help us with? Start sorting through some of the questions that we can help answer.
Yes, absolutely. We are getting lots of really, really great questions in the chat. So we'll combine some because some are similar, and I'll just start kicking them out to you guys. And as a reminder, we're getting lots of questions about how the initiatives work, but also feel more than welcome to ask questions of our endorsing partners here as well too. So the first question, I think I'll kick to Frank. Why a top 4 primary? Why not a top 2 primary like California or Washington currently have? You want to answer that one?
You bet. And to begin with, it's about having that additional competition. Easier to game those top 2 systems than it is when it's broader, like top 4. Plus, with the dominance of the 2-party system, you'd often only have representatives from those. It doesn't open up that, ability for independents or third-party candidates to be chosen. So we think it's important that, especially in that primary circuit, that there is more opportunity and more competition. It reduces, to the folks that were asking that question, the ability for people to game it and try to push forward a weaker candidate, because you're now going to have to go to the general election where the majority of people are going to actually vote, and where we're going to have a majority winner. So those working together really, support a better process. In particular, I think you see that in California and Washington. In fact, I think there was an example from this last primary election in California specifically in top 2 where that happened. So we really believe that's why top 4 is important.
Thanks, Frank. A second question for Kendra. We actually got this via email before the town hall. How do candidates qualify to be on the primary ballot under 126? For example, do they need to gather signatures, be nominated by a party, or what? And kind of an adjacent question is, will candidates still have party designations listed on the ballot? If you want to speak to sort of the mechanics of how an open primary works, Kendra.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So there are no nominations. Every candidate is essentially treated the same. They all appear on that June primary election, and there's no special ability to skip that and go straight to the general, as we actually have right now. If someone qualifies as an independent candidate, they don't ever appear on a June primary ballot. So everyone gets treated the same. They appear on the ballot in June, and then up to 4, regardless of party, move on. Candidates can still file with a party affiliation just like they do now. We don't do anything to change that in terms of how a candidate files. Right now, if you want to file for office, you go to the Secretary of State's website, you choose the race, you pay your fee, and you mark which party you want to appear on the ballot. So that would all stay the same. We don't do anything with signature requirements, signature thresholds that are in place right now, except for CI-126 puts a cap on the number that the legislature can require someone to have to gather to file as an independent. It's the cap. The cap is right where it is now. So we didn't make it harder. We didn't make it easier. But we felt it was important to make sure that a future legislature couldn't essentially make it impossible, make it really hard so that only the 2 major parties could get onto the ballot. That's not the point. We think more candidates, more competition is better. And so that's all that 126 addresses. The legislature right now has control over the laws that define how candidates access the ballot, how parties get onto the ballot, and that would stay the same. We don't give the legislature more or less power in that regard. They already have that authority.
And just to add one note to that too is that the importance in particular of having 2 initiatives, right? That everybody understands that Montana has what's called a single subject rule. So each initiative has to be about a single subject. So that's why you see 126 and 127 as separate initiatives, because they cover different subjects. It's actually an issue we were challenged on early in this that we had to take to court and won on. But it's also why we can address some additional problems that we might like to see, or issues that people might like to see on it. So these are the primary ones we think need to be enshrined in the the Constitution, those principles, and that's why you see 2.
Thanks. All right, this question is for Scott from our friend Roxy in Bozeman. She wants to know about these many veterans that identify as politically independent. Would you like to share a little bit about how you think the current system, which, just to clarify, we don't have party registration in Montana, Anyone can participate in the primary. You're just limited in what options you have when you have to pick a partisan ballot. So would you like to speak a little bit, Scott, or even David, about how that specifically affects veterans or just independent-minded voters in general?
Yes, absolutely. The acknowledging that it's about 50% of veterans that are veterans and active duty that are either registered independent or not affiliated with a party. In Montana, that doesn't preclude us from participating in a primary system. We still, as has been described here this evening, have to choose one of 4 ballots in the primary: a Republican ballot, Democratic ballot, Green ballot, or independent ballot, or Libertarian. But we can't vote across those. This is what we're trying to solve with this. So it's increasing competition. Any voter, regardless of affiliation, can vote for any candidate, regardless of affiliation.
Thanks, Scott. Another question we've gotten from a couple people, I'll just read Dale's version here, is maybe I'll kick this to Kendra or to Frank. Will this stop Democrats and Republicans from voting for the weakest candidate of the other party, sometimes called a spoiler candidate? How does this affect that or stop that from happening?
Yeah, I can take that one. That's exactly what this does. So right now, I think voters have to choose how they use their one vote. But certainly, there have been examples over the years of people doing just that, and there being sort of coordinated campaigns to try to get weaker candidates through to the general, or to try to use third-party candidates as spoilers. And under this system, if you have to get a majority, an outright majority to win, it is not in your best interest as a voter to vote for a weak candidate. It's in your best interest to vote for who you want to see elected and to see represent you. And candidates themselves, it's in their best interest to build the broadest coalition possible and to tell people why they should vote for you, not some sort of tricks. So I don't think we can say that there could never be some harebrained scheme out there for someone to try to do some of that type of trickery. But definitely this is a better system for elected officials needing to be responsive to the broadest group of the electorate. And so, that is one of the problems that we're solving for with these reforms.
Thanks, Kendra. Another question we've gotten from a couple of people, if 127 passes, what will happen if none of the general election candidates receive a majority or 50% plus one of the vote? Frank, you want to take that one, or?
Yeah, you bet. So 127 specifically assigns that responsibility to the legislature. Again, because we have a single subject rule, we can't have another initiative on it, but also there's a couple of choices, right? And really, when you look out in the world, the 2 choices are, generally speaking, are a runoff, or to use the system, runoff like they use in Georgia, or a similar system to the one that they use in Alaska, to decide who has the majority of the votes. And we think it's important, one, that the principle be enshrined through this initiative in our Constitution, but that decision is best made, that specific one, with public input through the public process, by the legislative process. And we know, because that charge is there, that for instance, the legislature is charged with having to create a balanced budget every session, and they do that. And making sausage, as they say, isn't always a pretty process, but they get it done. And so, knowing that the choices are limited, and that it's a charge specifically given to them, that has to be done in the public space and with public input, we think is the best process to make that selection.
Great, thank you. Here's the question that I would love maybe one of our or multiple of our endorsing partners to help answer. This is a question from Sandra. She's saying that we're assuming that Montana voters will want to take the time in a primary to learn about multiple candidates, 4, 5, 6 or more. She says, seems to her that citizens currently and historically prefer to base their vote on a party. How do you guys think that these initiatives will change that lack of public responsibility? How do you think that this might affect engagement, or will Montana voters want the opportunity to choose from a greater number or a variety of candidates? Do any of you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take a shot here. I kind of chatted a little bit earlier about our efforts to get our membership engaged in our local elections. And we felt that there was a pretty significant appetite for more information, more opportunities to come and meet candidates, more, beyond just getting flyers on the door. People wanted to come out and get that chance to see what the candidates were all about beyond party identification. I think with our experience, by kind of incentivizing people to learn more, we've seen that they want to learn more. So we're hopeful that this will indeed increase engagement in our local elections. So I think that's one of the big positives here of altering our system here with the 126 and 127. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, actually. And I would just offer that when you have special interests and you have party bosses dictating to people and limiting competition, people tend to tune out. They tend to throw up their arms and say, yeah, I'll just do whatever I'm told to do. When you increase the competition and increase the accountability by requiring each candidate to earn 50% plus one, in my experience, when you give people more opportunity to own their future like that, they're going to tune in and figure out who that best candidate is, who's going to represent my interests and the things that I care about in my community.
Yeah, and I agree with David. I think it's a great question. And, it is really kind of one of the principal reasons behind this, actually, right? When you think about it right now, how disengaged we are, where you saw those numbers that Kendra gave us, right? Where we're effectively electing the majority of people in the primary, where half as many people often vote as do in the general, and you're only looking at a small percentage of them. That's where we're disengaged, right? And where the opportunity is for us to be more engaged is by being able to look at everybody, being able to consider all of them, and not just when we get to the general, right? If you want to know why half the people vote in the primary, you heard from David and some of the others, right, about how, folks that are independents feel completely disengaged by this ability to be told they have to pick a side, right? This is not about the candidates. Let's be clear. This is about the voter and about giving voters the right, the freedom to choose, and the good outcomes that come from having more competition and choice.
Great. We are getting close to the end of our time, so how about we'll just do one more question, and as a reminder, please send any unanswered questions to us, and we'll be happy to interact with you and get those answered via email. But final question for you, Frank: what happens if one of the initiatives passes but not the other?
Yeah, they both have benefits, right? Clear benefits to having everybody on one ballot, to sending top 4 to the general, to having that accountability, that competition that comes with CI-126. Independently of that, CI-127 requiring the winner to have to enjoy a majority of the support of people they represent, right? Making them govern more broadly, making it harder for special interests to pick off a small percentage of people and have unweighted impacts on our election system. Even if one of them, and we certainly believe these are, that these are sister initiatives and they work well together, but the benefits of each of them we see if they're adopted, regardless of whether it's one or both.
Thanks, Frank. You want to bring us home?
I would be glad to, and I just would like to say, first, I want to thank, all the people that joined us on this call tonight to learn more about this and recognize the importance of what these initiatives mean to the state and how it can really give us a chance to put Montana voters back in charge of their election system. Also want to thank our partners here tonight for being willing to them. They're like me, and the other folks that work on our coalition, where they're interested in the best outcomes for Montana, and they told you why. They're heavily invested in it and what their incentives are. They're the kind of people it is an honor for me to be associated with, and I'm really glad that they're here. And just a reminder, if you have questions, please, that we didn't get to tonight, please make sure to forward those to us so that we can help get those answered for you. And even if you think of something tomorrow, please jump on there and get with us and let us know. And as important as anything, right? We are glad to see you engaged. Hope that you will be there with the rest of us voting in 3 weeks when ballots begin to come out, and that you see the merits of this fundamental change in our system and how it'll benefit our state for decades to come.